Hey there, Jammers. Artistic Cranberry here. Today we're drawing what I'm going to call a cat. As always, it's available on my Redbubble, link in the description below. So let's jump right in. Right now I'm beginning my sketching process, just blocking in the rough shapes and the general pose of the cat. I'm going to change the pose up a few times throughout this process. I'm using the same color I always use, the CMYK color code 404040 and I'm using the same brush I always use. I believe it's the Kyle's Cartoonist Inking Thick and Thin. And last time I mentioned that there are two modes that you can set your canvas to when you're making a new canvas in Photoshop. There's RGB and CMYK. The default is RGB color mode. If you have that selected, you're usually planning on using a mostly digital medium, not planning on printing it in the real world or onto paper. And that color code also allows you to save it as a transparent file, also known as a PNG. CMYK color mode is for printing to the physical world because most color printers, their inks are cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. And that's what those stand for. So what that does is it sets up all the color keying that you're using in Photoshop to automatically be in CMYK color values, so it transfers to the physical world better. As you can see, I've started my redlining and I'm already fidgeting and messing around with that pose a bit. I've changed it to a standing position. I'm about to change the front legs, so I decided I didn't like that paw. I'm eventually going to get that front paw to a point where I like it, where it's lifted up and it looks like the cat is walking. But, it still doesn't feel right, but it got to a point that I was happy with. And then I felt like the neck was too long, so I lassoed the head and moved it down on the piece. Now I'm adding in the final line art. When going into your final line art, I always recommend that you have your smoothing on. For the brush I use, I put it at 30% smoothing. I think that's just ideal. You always want your smoothing on just because it helps it be smooth. I've had my smoothing on this whole time, but sometimes when you're doing sketching, you won't have it on. Just make sure you got it on when you do your final line art. And as well, when you're doing your final line art, I mention this every time, you always want to make sure the outside of all your lines are connected and closed so that you can fill the inside of your shape if you want to create a clipping mask. I don't end up using a clipping mask this time just because I don't need it, but you always want to make sure those lines are closed so that you can make a clipping mask. Alright, so in here I'm working on the face shape and the fur around the face. This is loosely based on my cat Fluffer. She's a very fluffy tabby cat. Going in and fixing the eyes because they had close to the kind of expression I wanted for the cat, but not quite, so I fixed that there. Adding in the chest fur and making sure there's weight being put on the legs as they're touching and interacting with the ground. Doing the line art on that lifted paw, adding in some fur, putting the fluffy bits where they need to be. I decided I didn't like the size of the arm, changed it. Changing the shape of the body, putting in the back leg, or the haunch, as I like to call it. Putting in a lot of fur texture. And I believe I'm about to go into the back leg in just a second here. So, yep, and I'm choosing that farther back leg just because it looks like it has more weight to it, makes it look like the cat is in motion. And then a nice fluffy tail, erasing that extra line. And I should be going in to select the outside, select inverse, and fill the background with the color I'm going to use for my base. And I do pick a nice tabby brown color. I'm about to reduce the opacity because for the next step, I like to have a lower opacity for the background. I merged the line art and the color layer together, I believe, to do that. Alright, so what I'm doing is what's going to make this the cat. It is a cat made of the word cat. So all the coloring and all the shading is given through this text and font idea. So when you're doing this, you're using the shape and the color of the font that you're using to create the visual line and visual shape. So you have to carefully think about what you're doing. So whether you need it to be a bigger font or a thinner font, what colors you need to use, and what shape the letters themselves need to be. So right now we're going in on the eyes, and I did a much thicker bright yellow font for the irises, but for the line art and the pupil, I picked an almost black color, and I'm using a much finer line art, and I'm varying the shape of the letters to fit within the line art. And then here I believe I'm picking a nice pinky color for the nose. And you'll see I'm going to experiment a little bit with what I want to do for filling in these areas. And then I change my mind and decide I want there to be a little bit more open space for you to see between the letters rather than super filling it in. And here I'm using the way I'm writing in the word cat to create the lines and the shape of the ear so that it appears to have that concaved shape to it. And then I believe I'm moving on to a new color. Yep, a nice whitish color. As I said, my coloring and design on this is loosely based on my own cat, and she is getting older, so she's got a little bit of like a grayish color around her face and on the tips of her ears. Here you can see I start much thicker towards the center of where that color is going to be thicker. I'm using that A to fill in the shape right up by the mouth. But then as the color tapers out or gets into a thinner area, I'm making the font much smaller, using more letters rather than filling in a large area with fewer letters, and still creating that general line and shape. I do this the same way on the other side, much larger towards the center, and then tapering out and getting thinner as it leaves that very opaque grayed area. And then I'm going to use a much smaller, finer font laid all horizontal on the bridge of the nose, and it's going to get smaller and smaller. And then the tips of the ears, just very thin wisps on the tops of the hair there and on her ear fur. And then I believe I'm also going to go in on the tip of the tail, and that is going to be going with the flow of the fur and the tail, and then tapering out into a finer font. Next, I believe I'm going to be picking a much darker brown color to put in the stripes. These stripes are somewhat similar to the look of the stripes on my cat, but as you can see, I'm using the line of font, so each line of the lettering going across with each other represents a stripe, and that's important for the visual decisions I make later. So each of these is an individual stripe, and I change the thickness and darkness and length and size of the font as I'm writing to represent the way a cat's stripes in their fur kind of wibbles and wobbles. And then I'm going to do one more line like that, and then I switch to horizontal because it just, I feel, represents the shape of the pattern on a cat's fur better, using that to represent some darker spots on the face, a little bit of darker color on the ears. And then I'm using this to add an idea of shading around the eyes. I'm going in with that darker color on top, and then underneath with the lighter color I used for the cheeks and the nose. And next I should be going in with these larger lines for the body. And as you can see, I'm using a much larger font and a much larger shape to represent those individual lines. This is a good time to mention that I actually first learned about this technique and how to do it in a graphic design class I took at college. And it taught me a lot about how to incorporate thinking like a graphic designer into normal illustrative design. So instead of just thinking about what I want and what I think will look good, keeping in mind to a viewer that has no idea what I was going for until they look at it, what is going to read visually to them. So earlier in the piece, I made the artistic and stylistic choice that each direct line of font with each other that goes cat, 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 cat appears as one stripe. So for these areas that I wanted to appear as larger but singular stripes, instead of putting together a bunch of smaller cats and smaller rows of cats, I put them in one large row. Here I'm going in with my base color, back to that tabby brown color I originally filled with, and I'm following those same rules and shape ideas, filling in the larger areas with larger font, trying to keep to a very readable pattern, using the line to draw the viewer's eye in the direction it is supposed to go. And then in here, I change the direction the font is going because of the shape of the tail. And then I continue going down in that horizontal direction. And then I'm adding in a few more cats just where I thought it needed a little bit more color in the area. Now I'm going on to the face and doing the same thing, making those horizontal lines to show the shape and show the curvature of the cat's face and how the fur texture looks. And keep on going in these horizontal lines and filling in these areas, going around the shape of previous areas that I've filled in. And then I should be doing the same thing on the other side. Yep. And then I'm following those lines again, still horizontal. And I think that's about it. Remember to like and subscribe if you want to see more content like this. The Redbubble link is in the description below. And as always, have a very good day.